found, but how can we how have we found the IQ gene? So you tell me we found the IQ gene. So like, what are you talking about?
Okay, so let me try to understand so you can explain. So IQ is a metric, right? It's actually what's called a G-loaded factor test. What it's doing is it's trying to say what we loosely call in culture intelligence. Can I find a series of tests for which any behavior can be put in and all other behaviors can be factored out?
Content over everything! So, what are you guys talking about? Because I wanted to ask
the JQ.
Oh, I think that's a JQ.
The Jewish question.
The Jewish question.
Okay,
We don't have to. They put a camera.
I think you definitely Dr.
Jordan,
that's quite because you answered the question I asked
my
you.
wife will hate you. She does.
Was in
He's the only man
regards
I
to
can hate with.
the decision to create Israel, and you gave the story about 1947.
So say that again.
What's
the question?
In regards to Jews, the Jewish question about creating Israel, and you answering me, and you told me about 1947.
Yeah.
So my question to all of you is: are you all aware of the Balfour Declaration of 1917?
1917.
Yes.
So was it decided back then?
No. So basically, what happened is the Balfour Declaration was, if you like, British government policy that they favoured the creation of a Jewish state.
A Jewish national home.
He's correct. A Jewish national home. He's correct. In the historical Jewish homeland. That was given legal effect in the San Remo documents and treaties, and also the Treaty of Severus, which was a treaty between the defeated Ottoman Empire and the principal Allied powers, which related to the disposal of Ottoman territories in the Middle East. So basically what would happen to Iraq, what is now Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, these were all run by the Ottoman Empire. Prior to World War I, they were allied with the Germans.
And that document itself was like sponsored by
basically,
Rothschild.
It was not sponsored by Rothschild. So basically,
Well, he was heavily involved in it.
You wrote the letter to the Arthur Balfour.
No,
Balfour responded to.
Balfour wrote a letter to Rothschild, but there was, basically those territories, the Ottoman Empire after World War II, has basically said, we're handing these territories over to you. Excuse me. You can do what you like with them. So the principal Allied powers, which were Britain, France, Italy, Belgium, Japan, and one other country I've forgotten.
And those territories, are they based on the borders
So they
within
created the mandates.
They're not based on Canaan in the Torah.
No. So they basically created the mandate system, which is all the countries now that you have, like Iraq, Kuwait. So there was a mandate for Mesopotamia, which covered Kuwait, what is now Kuwait, and what is now Iraq. And that was given to the British. There was a mandate for Syria, which encompasses now what is Syria and Lebanon. That was given to the French. There's a mandate for Palestine, which was given to the British to govern, which is now what equates to what is now Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, and also what is now Jordan. And basically, if you like, the legal foundation for a Jewish state comes out of the mandate for Palestine, which was agreed by the League of Nations in 1924.
I want to add something really controversial as well. When religions take land, they conquer it and they subjugate the people in it, and either convert them or make them subjects of their Christian or Muslim empire. When the evil colonialists conquered the Middle East, what did they do? They said, we believe in the right to self-determination of the indigenous people, we're going to give you the land. And we go around saying how evil colonialists are, but in reality, the entire Middle East was given back. The Turkish, Muslim Turks were conquered it before. They occupied that land. All the wealth was sent back to the capital of the Caliphate. But when the colonialists, these evil British, French people took over, what did they do? They gave it back to the people that lived there. And there's this perversion often of history of what happens, where people hark back and they say it was so great under the Caliphate. But the reality is caliphates occupied, used swathes of land and erased the indigenous culture.
Not everywhere. Because in Spain it was different. In Muslim Spain, and Sicily was different.
But that's not nothing to do with the Ottoman Empire.
No, it has nothing to do. But it is a caliphate in what was in Spain and what was in Sicily, the Emirates of Sicily. So it's not always the same.
So I think anyone who says, you're absolutely right, anyone who says that all caliphates or all Muslims are X is ignorant to history. Some caliphates were better, some caliphates were worse. The main point I was trying to make there was, though, we see the creation of Israel, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon as a bad thing. In reality, it was far superior to what was before, because what was before was imperial empires ripping out the wealth and sending it back as a tribute to the capital. And that's why the Ottoman Empire became so powerful, because they ripped the resources out of the rest of it.
Just moving on to recently as well, I've just got to say that, it does appear that the Trump presidency is moving all of the forces out of Syria and Afghanistan. So, the left has always been on about him, about being some sort of genocidal maniac who wants to cause a massive war in the Middle East, but he seems to be doing the opposite of that. And
he's not going to be president forever.
I'd say if Hillary Clinton was in, there would be a massive war now in the Middle East.
I will add one further thing. Is everyone familiar with Noam Chomsky?
Yeah.
He's built his entire political platform on campaigning against foreign intervention. He didn't want them in Vietnam, he doesn't want them in Iraq. And what was his response to Trump pulling troops out of Syria? No, we need to keep the troops in Syria. It's just tribal.
But good old Noam Chomsky has been corrupted or senile at his current age. And God bless him. It's time for him to
How
meet
do you
the Lord.
think Israel can sell the two-state solution to the Palestinians? Because that's been offered before in the
so
past.
my personal opinion is that the Palestinians have never had any interest in a two-state solution.
Correct.
They aren't interested in it now.
Bloody Palestinians. They are terrible people.
Are they? Really? Are you joking? Are you joking?
I think Israel has realised the reality that the two-state solution is never going to happen.
So every proposal for partner, they've rejected every. There's been.
Yeah, but the proposals haven't been good.
No, but there's been.
What of a two-state solution is
In history, can I finish? In history, there's been 6 proposals for partition. The Palestinians have rejected every single one of them.
But how many?
And they've got and the first offer was vastly superior to anything that they've been offered.
But what is the percentage of land in the West Bank in those two-state solution proposals? How much of that land will go to the Palestinians?
95%. David.
And by the way, Arabs are now in control of 78% of historical Palestine. That's called Jordan.
No, forget about Jordan.
No,
We're
but
talking about
that's
West Bank. Let's talk about West Bank.
No, but let's talk about what was Palestine, because people talk about this all the time.
You're jumping the post. Let's talk about West Bank.
There's already been a
Everybody was
partition.
given their land.
There's already been a
They
partition
just
into
said
Jewish.
themselves. Now you're
Jewish.
talking about Jordan
this already
taking
One
for
of
Palestinians.
the most beautiful things is when people say Israel is an ethno-state, but we want an Arab Palestine.
And they lived happily. It was nice.
3/4.
If you support the two-state solution, you support ethno-states basically. You'd support divisions on religious or ethnic
Two-state
lines.
solution never worked. Right? It's only a one.
I don't support a two-state solution.
The liars
I think there
are
should be
one
one
state
state with equal rights for everybody.
What, they should be one state?
That's what he supports.
The original Israel was based
I
on
don't think it works if there's two cultures.
the original
It works. It can work with multiple races, but
there
not
was
with
a
multiple
state for
cultures.
There was a state for Palestine.
So I'd say culture is dominant.
But
in
the
that respect.
Jordanians and Egyptians,
We do Israel-Palestine all the time. What we're actually going to do now is the J. We didn't. We actually. We're going to do the
I want to have a
JQ.
chat. Have a chat about the JQ or something different.
The JQ, for those that don't know, is the Jewish question.
I want to talk about you were talking about last week.
Well, let's do that, shall we? Because I have the privilege here. Shall we just make the claim first of all? To those who don't know what the JQ is, I'm going to preface it by saying
sounds like a Curb Your
it's
Enthusiasm.
called the Jewish question, right? So
I hope it's not. Do we shoot them or do we gas them?
that would be rather tiresome and tedious for me, right? Gassing and stuff, so old school. There are other ways to get eugenic change. So, to those who don't know, if you don't know, the alt-right, or I represent the neo-reactionary right for the last couple of decades. We believe in a future model of the world that is not the current model.
Just say what you are, you're far right.
Yeah. No, very far right.
Okay.
Extremely
At least
far
he's
right.
honest. At least he's honest.
So we take our position, just to help Joseph along, we take our position from God, and we believe in a hierarchy of nations, in strong ethno-states, with each people living their own world in a particular life. Now, I'm going to represent this view only for Joseph. It's not my view per se, but the Jewish question is one of the biggest concerns for white ethno-nationalists. And the Jewish question, to put it simply, is this.
He's the whitest.
Yeah. I'm clearly, I can call Hitler, I can call a coconut, whatever you want, right? You know, I'm clearly.
Oh, you're just a wannabe.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm so much more than that. So the JQ, as opposed to Joseph, particularly everyone else, has two particular strands. One of the strands says this: If I believe in an ethno-state and I recognize the nation of Israel, so I fundamentally support the Zionist principles. I don't believe in a two-state solution. I don't believe in equal Palestinian rights. I believe in a hegemony of the Jewish people in their historic Jewish lands, and they should take as much of it as they can. And then they should have a Jewish ethno-state. I have no problem with that. And you find many people in the alt-right also support that principle. The alt-right's problem is if there is a Jewish ethno-state, which is the legitimate and supported by the West homeland for the Jewish people. Question number one, should other white people be allowed to have an ethno-state? And question number two, what do we do about which we can argue and dispute the facts about Jewish influence in the diaspora that is preventing a white ethno-state? Those are the two questions.
Good point.
So perfect. So first and foremost, I think we need to determine some terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because when you speak to a Jew, we believe we are multi-ethnic.
Yep.
So there are multiple ethnicities. So in the sense that you have Ethiopian Jews who share a collective religion, memory, history, but different language, different foods, physically, like genetically.
Well, you're
they
not
look
the same
quite
race.
different,
You're
but
not the same race.
we do share genes.
Similar culture, maybe some genes.
So,
But
as,
we're not the same
as
race.
an example, we have a caste of Jews called the Kohanim, the Cohens. Coincidentally, it's my surname, but I'm not a Cohen. And they descend from the family, basically the
That's
family.
for biblical times.
Yeah, so the family of Moses, Aaron was Moses' brother. So they're the Levites, and Aaron's descendants.
They're
are
the
Kohan.
ones who have to be like the priests.
Cohens from yeah, so
And then the
priests
Levites who served in the temple alongside.
So the priests in Poland have the same DNA as the priests from Ethiopia. So
And there's
physically
also-
they look very different, but they share genetic markers. So where I was going with that is I think we need to define what what we mean by an ethno-state, because Israel itself is not just a Jewish state.
pluralistic, yeah.
It's a pluralistic society. There's Arabs living there. 20% of the population aren't Jewish, like religiously or ethnically, for want of a better word. So first and foremost, what do we mean when we say an ethno-state? I think that's the first thing.
Okay, so let me answer that. Would you believe, so if I look at models of statehood, would you believe that Israel, as it needs to be would you believe it should be a multicultural, pluralistic, multi-ethnic state?
Well, that's what it is already.
No, but I'm saying, I'm talking about your final vision for the place, right? Do you believe it should be where a Jewish law is supreme, or do you believe it should be a civic nationalistic state?
So my personal opinion,
Yeah, I'm
and
just
it's it should definitely be a detachment from church and state.
So a secular state.
So a secular state.
So you believe
the
that-
reason
okay,
for
right.
that is I think religion, as it's practiced today, it would just create. I wouldn't trust any religious authority to mandate how other religious, religious, because there's a lot of, just like in Islam, there's like you look at the Muslim world, they're slaughtering each other.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want the Jewish community to descend into that, and I want a
So
separation.
peace by
between-
plurality, peace by enlightenment and values of rights. Right? Okay.
Have wars against
Yeah, that's right. They do. Secular states have wars.
So you're right, absolutely, but it's usually not internally amongst themselves.
So if we then continue on with that line of reasoning and go, okay, so in that case we don't use the term, because it might be therefore loaded and you've defined the term separately, as an ethno-state, and we call it a Jewish state, and its internal model is pluralistic, democratic, what have you, but it is nevertheless a boundary on the map where all Jews can go home.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, okay. So with that in mind, would you support the equivalence for, let's say, the Norwegians?
Personally,
you say-
I think my personal opinion is that different national groupings have a right to express their own a place in their indigenous homeland to express their national and culture.
So if a
And their
Norwegians
expression.
wanted to express that by an ethno-state, would that be acceptable to you?
Personally, if that was the expressed will of if it was a peaceful and not looking to conquer other nations,
Just within the
Yeah.
nation,
but
not internationally.
within
just
its
within the
agreed
nation.
territorial boundaries, if
Correct.
they wanted to have, I don't know, national holidays that reflected Norse mythology, for example, I think that would be perfectly acceptable.
So now would you,
I do have a problem with freedom of religion, you know, if you're talking about in different countries, because, you know, you start having that and different religions will try and install different cultures in, you know, various societies, and then you have the multi-culti society, and what you then see is a particular religion that wants to become dominant.
But for example,
there
in
you have the
Britain-
massive
in Britain,
internecine civil
although it's not-
conflicts that
Okay,
comes from that.
for example, in Britain, you have a national day of rest it's not really upheld anymore. But it used to be Sunday.
No,
When
church laws.
I was a child, it was Sunday. There was no shops.
Sunday meant something.
Sunday was a different day to other days of the week. There was limited public transport. Very few shops were open.
But more importantly, you went to church.
Yeah, people would go to church. I mean, I wouldn't go to church, but other people
You're
would
always
go.
welcome.
Other people would go to church.
Don't worry, you can go to a mosque instead, okay? We'll protect you, don't worry.
But that comes with a jizya.
There's an entrance fee there.
So just to build back into the keeper.
So when you're talking about a sort of an expression of culture, so for example in Israel, the National Day of Rest is a Saturday.
Yep.
Because that reflects the Jewish religious practice.
Business about
In the
it.
same way that, and that if you actually go to Israel, that's more how Sunday used to be.
Absolutely. So building on that, we can see that there are ways for. So Joseph brought on the fact that the nation states
And I don't think
came
has to be any conflict between individual peoples who might be like, for example, my family came here from Poland in the turn of and from Lithuania at the turn of the 20th century. They came here seeking refuge. They had no conflict with the wider culture. They were not looking to impose their religious practice on anybody else.
Did you?
So if you
I
look
mean,
at the
you
difference,
probably weren't there at the time, but I mean, did they feel it was important to integrate into British society?
They all changed their names.
They all changed their names.
There's a history just in the Jewish name set. But to go back to the JQ, which is meant to be the primary narrative for Joseph Everyone is, so you look at this thing, Joseph mentioned empires were receding, nation states were coming. So if I trace that back to the Peace of Westphalia, and finally we started the retraction of empires and the construction of nation states. We agreed there could be many nation state models. One could be a civic nationalist state, one could be an ethno state, one could be a sort of balance of a plurality state. Here is the problem for white ethno-nationalists. Because of the replacement birth rate, they are going to be demographically replaced.
Or just make more babies.
Wait with me a second. There's nothing to dispute about demographic replacement. Their concern is this. They see, rightfully or wrongfully, a history of Jewish liberalism, a history of Jewish intellectual neoliberalism, traceable from Marx to every great Jewish mind that has written great books, that fundamentally either, and I'm not claiming I support this view, either for a corrosive neoliberalistic view that says we don't want to accept white ethno models because of what happened, or a diaspora working against their genetic self-interest. These are their two views, right?
Can I respond?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that you find with anti-Semitism is that whatever the anti-Semite values, he projects the very worst onto the Jew. So put some explain in Christendom, where the most revered thing in the world was the worship of Jesus as the Son of God, what did the Jews do? They killed Jesus. In Islamic world, where the revelation was the most revered thing, what did the Jews do? They killed the prophets. In Nazi Germany, where the nation-state fascism was Nazism was the central pillar of the Reich, what did the Jews do? They were behind communism. In communist Russia, what was it? The Jews were behind capitalism. And so you have this pattern. So with the Jew person, when it comes, so there have been Jewish people involved in open borders, in all these movements, from the very early socialists right the way
it's not the modern phenomenon.
to the modern. But you also find opposing Jews on the other side. So even today in conservatism, many of the big names are Jews.
In America, if you look in American conservatism, for example, if you look at the two or three of the top conservative podcasts in America. There's Dennis Prager, there's Ben Shapiro, there's Mark Levin.
If you just look at the AIPAC data, you know that there's very strong support from conservative Christians, and there's nothing wrong. And I don't think because I know a lot of people in this movement, right, for other reasons, and a lot of them are also split. They've got nothing per se against a Zionist, even though they don't want to participate. Their primary concern still remains that the diaspora has consistently worked against their national interests.
So I would
So do you understand what I'm saying? Right?
So what I was trying to say, yes, there are absolutely Judaism, the Jewish people themselves are fiercely divided, not in a violent way, but they're divided amongst left and right. You have a
spectrum.
In America, you have a very strong left-wing core of Jews. In say Israel, it's moved more to the right. So there isn't this consensus amongst Jewish people as to what is the Jewish position on borders, on nation states. So many of the Jews that you'll speak to, like Stephen, an example, will support a white ethno-state based as long as it comes around by the consensus of the people. There's not violence involved.
Yes,
But
it doesn't persecute minorities, etc.
One of the weird things that's happened in the last 50 years or so is, or maybe longer than that maybe, we've moved away. It used to be, we believed in Woodrow Principles, the 14 Principles, the right to self-determination of indigenous people. And so that's where movements like Kurdistan comes from. That's where those that support support a Palestinian state, they do so based on ethnicity. They say the Palestinians are the ethno group they believe have a claim or a stronger claim to the land than the Jewish ethno group. And so they base all these frames, but it doesn't work when they come back to Europe. Because they're happy for ethno-states and to support national liberation for people on the other side of the world, but because they live in this country, they want this country to be built on their model.
The alt-right would summarise that with one of their very many cliches, which is diversity for thee but not for me, right? So this is one of the kind of many taglines that come out of the project. My question to you, Joseph, is like this: is that so if you accept that there's a Jewish political spectrum, and I assume you say it's equally divided, let's say it's some sort of distribution curve, would you say that the left side of the diaspora are a legitimate oppositional force to the ethno-nationalist self-interest of people where the diaspora has disproportionate power?
I think that's a fair claim? I think one of the issues with the Jewish community in particular, and maybe where they take a more stronger stand, is there's a natural, because of the history, there's a natural suspicion of anything that looks like it might turn into a movement which would persecute Jews. Now, ironically, at the moment it's the left.
The left are more anti-Semitic right now than possibly. I think the left is a clear and present danger to Jewish rights.
The Democratic Party in America.
They're more anti-Israel than more anti-Semitic.
They're more anti-Jewish. They're more anti-Jewish.
They're not anti-Israel, they're anti-Jewish.
No, let's not conflate anti-Israeli government with anti-Semitic.
So I'm not. I'm saying when you're posting Rothschild, as an example.
When you're posting Holocaust denial or Rothschild conspiracy.
Okay, I agree with that. And that's
wrong. And that's a lot of that is coming from the left.
I agree with that.
But so then to build that question on further.
So my point is that I think that there's maybe a heightened sensitivity, which may
because of the history.
Where Jews would take where in theory Jewish people might take a more sympathetic view to those, but because of the history, and also some people, let's be honest, they're not as articulate as you in the way they express themselves.
They might be sea-calling around and stuff like that, right? Yeah, obviously.
They may express themselves in ways which maybe
threatening.
Which may be construed as threatening or insensitive, and all these other things.
So having a massive podcast called The Daily Show is in poor taste, if nothing else, right? So the Daily Show is a poor taste, right? You shouldn't be
the Daily Show.
The Daily Show.
The Daily Show.
It has poor taste, right? It's very poor taste.
Can I ask you a question?
It's very funny, but it's not particularly sensitive, right?
Do you think that a lot of the people on the far right, they try to hide the fact that they may have some anti-Semitic views because they know that if they expose this, then because a lot of the people know the horrors of the Holocaust, they'll get condemned more. Whereas opposed with Muslims, it's easier to attack.
I'm going to give you a scary statistic. Amongst people this is according to Jewish Policy Research, which is a very legitimate research company that looks at certain trends within the Jewish community and trends that affect the Jewish community. For people that self-report, so this is in a survey where they self-report as being very far right, and people that self-report as being Muslim, so self-identify, people in the Muslim community are more likely to deny the Holocaust than the far right, which is crazy, because if you're a Nazi, you've got cause to deny the Holocaust, because it's probably your biggest thing that prevents you from denying it.
That may be true, but you're still not answering my question. Do you think there's people on the far right who because they know the horrors of the Holocaust, like if you go on the media and you start denying the Holocaust, you get shut down straight away.
From the far right, I can answer your question differently because I have been in the far right for a long time in my life, and I don't think that's the primary motivator for what you're talking about. The primary motivator is the fear of demographic replacement. blaming Jews is a natural extension of a primal fear, just like being sensitive to something that would be anti-Jewish is a primal fear. It is not motivated by the fact that they don't want to go seagull. In the US, they're seagulling everywhere. So they're expressing that kind of
I think there's
right?
also an issue, which is like for a lot of far-right movements, they aren't democratic movements.
No, God, no, we don't believe in democracy.
So you don't believe in democracy. So there is something that's for a group that's historically been persecuted,
yes,
especially by people that don't believe in democracy.
Yeah.
Whether it's of the right or left, there's going to be a natural suspicion of those
Absolutely,
movements
that's
and
a legitimate suspicion.
a natural opposition. So there are certain things, for example, freedom of speech, various democratic, right to a fair trial.
Jurisprudence,
yeah, exactly. Jurisprudence, these type of sort of things, free elections and so on. Which I think that if the far right, or if those in favour of, if you like, indigenous rights, and within the UK were more sensitive to those issues, I think they probably find that the Jewish community would be less concerned about.
Can I just jump in, because I think we're missing like one of the fundamental points, and that is who is actually indigenous. And so, so as an example, I wouldn't call Jews indigenous here, but if you were here 1,000 years ago, there were Jews here, and both me and you have mixed race.
Yeah, but they're tiny
So where I'm trying to go with this is, when you base your state on ethnicity alone, I think there are slight issues. Like, as an example, and I'll use Islam as an example. In Islam, anybody can join Islam, but you have to accept the values of the culture you're joining. So you take the Shahada, you suddenly believe in certain things should be punishable by death, other things so you should give to charity.
You're just focusing on the crap stuff.
No, it's zakat as well. Look, we'll all be controversial here. It's dismissed. Anyway,
no holds barred. No holds barred.
So what I'm trying to say with that, but you once you take the Shahada, you become a Muslim, you accept the values. Within Judaism, there's the same mechanism. Anybody can become Jewish. You can't become white, and you describe yourself as far right. I could describe myself as far right, but anyone on the far right would say you're not far right, or you're certainly not my far right, because you've got Jewish blood.
But that's usually a lack of intellectual understanding of far right literature and principles. People confuse far right with either fascist or ethno-nationalist. No serious thinker on the right considers it pure.
I think you're being disingenuous here because no single. I want to address what you're saying.
Just let me finish one thing, and then you can jump in. So no single deep, proper intellectual thinker on the far right accepts either a pure ethno state, just on the basis that it's not an optimal implementation of the 14 words. So they reject a fascist, ethno kind of clerical view from the mid-last century. What they're looking for is the fundamental axis is preservation of the largest spanning set of the genetic cluster. I can look at the genetic outliers.
What about culture and values?
But culture and values don't emerge from genes.
No, it's not true though. That's false. I was going to talk about that last time.
But I mean, that's a different question. Where the
culture. We do that one separately, right?
Because there are things. Because my argument would be that there's certain things about if you like British society. British society has certain cultural products that anybody can adopt them.
But you see, you're arguing from a principle. So here's where the neo-reactionary right disagree with you, and to your point, Joseph, as well. Collectivism and how we form groups and socials have two bases in the spectrum. And one on the spectrum, I have physical collectivism. You're like your brother, your mother, and your father. A couple of genes later, your family, and a couple of genetic hops you nowhere like it. The universalist doctrine, be it a faith like Islam, there's neither Jew nor Greek under Christ, ma values, ma ethic, ma constitution. These are universalist abstract principles that allow us chimps to play together. So there's physical collectivism, me and my brother against my cousin and my tribe, and then there's abstract collectivism. Abstract collectivism, I believe one brother under Christ because I'm a Christian, and I believe that universalist principle, but you cannot deny physical collectivism. Look around the park, run the data numbers, blacks forming groups, brown forming groups. And the only people who are individualistic by a ratio of about 30% genetically can be shown to be whitey. So you can understand Whitey's problem. He's being overrun on the board by collectivism. Now, if the answer, like you say, is universal suffrage, collectivism by religion, collectivism by constitution, collectivism by cultural values, they're not biologically based. They're biologically emergent.
No, they're not
Very
emergent.
big difference,
it's not true.
right?
You're completely wrong, right? Because if you look at Britain today, right, or if you look at America, all these Western European countries, right,
like America, Britain, 1950s, 1960s. Okay, their culture is completely different to the culture that they had
Evolving.
1,000 years ago. Right, it's completely different, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And Western liberalism is different to traditionalism, and they're both
doing the
based on
JQ.
and they're both based on a white society, right? So what you're saying that culture comes from genetics, right? It's found to be false.
No, that's not true. So the way science and neo-realism looks at it is that there's no principle that is not a mix of genes and environment. Nothing is 100% genetic, nothing's 100%. So
now
let me give you some example.
now you're
So
contradicting
divorce,
yourself, right?
divorce.
Because before you said it's emergent from DNA, now you're saying it's a
But
little
let me
bit of
explain
DNA,
what I mean.
right?
Perhaps my mistake.
Obviously,
Perhaps
it's
you
a
did
little bit of DNA and a little bit of
No, so let me
environment.
give you an example. So let me give you some cases. Divorce is 32% genetic. Your political views hereditary are 40% genetic. No one is saying they're 100% genetic. They're saying 60% is environmental, 40% is genetic. Let me give you a simple example.
So are you saying that divorce is 30% genetics?
32%.
So basically what you're saying is that because of
But 68% is not.
But what you're saying is that countries
Right.
that are like India, Pakistan, right, we have lower
Yeah.
divorce rate. You're saying that they're superior to white society.
I did
right?
not mention the word superior,
Because-
nor am I
but do
making
you
a
think that
value
divorce
judgment.
so you're not making a value judgment on divorce?
No, I'm just making
So
an
you are someone on the
observation.
alt-right, okay, Neo-Reactionary.
I'm not an all-right.
On the Neo-Reactionary, you're not making a position on divorce. You don't think it's a bad thing.
No, I'm making a deeper intellectual principle that started 20 years ago, is that neo-realism cannot be ignored. So I'm not making a value judgment, a political statement, or a moral statement. I make a statement that says we look at phenomena that are genetic, they always have a balanced environment, and your social layering comes
You don't have a
after.
position on divorce. You don't think...
My personal position on divorce has nothing to do with my argument.
Well, no, it is part of your political position, right?
No, I will love my wife forever
What's
under
your
Christ. I mean,
neo-reactionary position on divorce? You think it's a good
Okay,
thing or a bad thing?
but turning it back to the political realm, do you think divorce should be a legal right in British law, or should it be?
If you want my personal particular point of view, I'm a neo-reactionary, so I believe the best way to organize society and cultures are based on the true state of nature. In that true state of nature, we start with an axiom that says we take every gene, trait, person, culture, and race as not being equal.
As not being equal.
Correct. And from that position of scientific realism, we then come about with that axiom as what do we do with difference? Equality and these things are Enlightenment values. They did not exist in any society and culture prior to the Enlightenment. They came off the age of reason.
I disagree with you because they exist within Judaism.
Well, but do they really? But let's pause there for a second.
But they do, because there's a fundamental principle. One of the first principles in the Torah is that every human being is created in the image of God.
Correct.
So it's a question of
Whether they existed or not before the Enlightenment, I mean,
Enlightenment values.
That implies that
the rights.
The Enlightenment entailed a development in human thought.
It did, of course.
So why should we go? Are you suggesting we go back to pre-Enlightenment principles that are more genetically or historically grounded?
Let me tell you the grounding root of our movements. It started about. So I left. I studied and lived in the US for a long time. And at the time where the birth of this movement can be traced pretty much to about a time in the Bay Area and Cambridge and Mass, what we consider ourselves as neo-reactionaries. Right? So we are the political metaphors behind everything downstream, like Trump and everyone else. This is our work.
The so-called alt-right, is that?
No, the alt-right is just some cultural phenomenon. The alt-right are a bunch of kids on a computer. Right? So in the neo-reactionary movement, we believe if we take these fundamental principles, and we thought if we look at the challenge of the existential crisis of the West, we had to retrace the steps of the West to find out what was the last big tranche, and that was the Enlightenment.
The last big crash.
The last big tranche of change, which was the Enlightenment. And what does the Enlightenment look to those who don't know it? There's the age of faith before the age of reason. The age of reason gave us individualism, for which we got liberty and capitalism. It gave us science and medicine off the single fact that you are not a born of original sin. You are born as a free agent.
And all of this
so the neo-reactionary
an improvement in the human condition.
Correct. So the neo-reactionary
and the development in thought and science
so the
and politics.
So if
and it just so happens that there are many Jews involved in this.
So you don't understand what the neo-reactionary movement is. So what we do is we decided to take the intellectual roots of these things and revisit and re-question their assumptions. What do we have that was different? If I look at the end of philosophy, I ended logical positivism at Wittgenstein, Tractatus, and everyone else. I ended the ability of mathematics to close anything by Gödel's incompleteness theorem. I have Heisenberg at 10 to the minus 34 saying I can't measure the universe. So our Holy Trinity says in maths, physics, and computing, I can't know anything by certainty in mathematics. I can't measure the universe to 10 to the minus 34, and anything I think, read, write, and everything is speaking to me is a computational algorithm. From that foundational point of view, we revisit the Enlightenment, and the great things and the great products of the world of the Enlightenment have fundamental intellectual problems. We look around at the world and we see these observational differences, and we're not making any seagull claims. We're saying we wish to. I'm so sorry. We wish to revisit these
of the
things.
Enlightenment. You expected you're suggesting the Enlightenment to be a success would have had to solve all of our issues.
I'm not saying that
economic.
at all. No, what I'm saying is I want to revisit the fundamental epistemological basis of these assumptions, not just me, a lot of other people, and say which bits of them are valid or not. And the single thing that springs out of that answer, axiomatically, is the egalitarianism that is considered dogma. So what is dogma? What does the cathedral tell us? Every man, everyone born, all of us are equal. What is the heresy? The dogma is love, and the heresy is hate. If you do not subscribe to the dogma of equality, you're considered a hater. We don't consider ourselves as haters. We consider ourselves as truth seekers.
So can I just add something in? And it's not going to do the JQ
No, it is. I know.
No. What I'm about to say is, where you trace these things to is quite interesting, because as an Orthodox Jew who's somewhat familiar with the religion, there's people that are far more knowledgeable than me, but a lot of the values you trace to the Enlightenment, we actually trace to Judaism. And so the whole just as what Stephen was saying, the whole thrust of egalitarianism, equality, progressivism. I look to the Old Testament, and you can read the Old Testament in two ways. You can read the Old Testament.
I'm a Christian. My brother is neither Greek nor Jew. I mean, you know.
Yeah, and so you can read the Old Testament, and you can read conquering the land. You can read an angry God. You can read, or you can look at the liberation of the slave, the freedoms and equalities.
Right. But I don't think that might be because some of the early Enlightenment thinkers were Jewish, like Spinoza and
this is what I'm saying. I'm saying Judeo-Christian values actually predating the Enlightenment.
I'm not making the claim that there was a Dark Ages, and I don't mean the literal Dark Ages. That these, of course, you say Spinoza. Without Spinoza, we could never have had doubt. We could never have doubting transubstantiation. Therefore, we could not have had Galileo Kepler, and we could not have had Martin Luther. So, of course, there's a heritage of thought and values. The Indian side of my family is much older than Jay. We have texts going way further that speak about not equality in a Western sense, but balance. So I'm not claiming those things are there. I'm claiming that the Enlightenment's dogma is creating an existential crisis for the West. And that dogma, it says you cannot question inequality of men and women, you can't question enlightenment. And our job for the last 20 years has been to create that metapolitical narrative, enforce everyone politically to return to this state of nature. And Brexit, Trump, AFD, Salvini are our work.
Can we get some definitions? What do we mean by equal? I think that's the most important.
Well, this is the problem straight away. So we start with the position that nothing is equal, and then we want to negotiate what do you do with difference. As opposed to saying we are fundamentally propositionally equal, and then I need to try to explain away my difference. But we invert that and say, no, we are fundamentally counter-narrative. We say, no, we are fundamentally equal. How do we negotiate this equality? As opposed to saying, you and I are the same. How do I deal with my difference? That's not grounded in science.
But there's equality, and I mean, there's obviously different types of equality. There's numerical equality, and there's
two beans and two beans, my lord.
But when we use this term equality, I understand what people are saying is that we should be equal before the law, and I think there's a supreme value,
which is a liberal idea in a sense.
Exactly, but I think there's a supreme value in saying that regardless of, if we have a dispute. If we have a business transaction and we have a dispute, God forbid, exactly. That there should be that when we go before the authorities to settle that dispute, that we should be treated as both as equal people with not one side or other prejudiced in advance. And I think there's a supreme value in that. There's got nothing to do with.
You don't think it's supreme? You think it's universalist?
It's got nothing to do with the fact that my nose might be bigger than yours, or you're taller.
If you have a
or the fact that you're taller than me. You're taller.
Damn, nobody's perfect.
This is how I see it, what you're saying, right? It's true, right? If you're doing business, right, there's a correct way to do business and there's an incorrect way to do business, right?
Okay.
When you got two people, right, you're gonna say, okay, you're gonna say this is the correct thing, right? This is the correct outcome. You don't say because you're a Jew, we're gonna give it to you, right?
Exactly. The judge doesn't say we're gonna automatically give it to the man, automatically give it to the woman.
Right thing, right?
Yeah, but you see, that's a great example.
Your problem is this, right? You're saying that because someone is white, or English, we should give it to them. But then that's a contradiction to doing the right thing. You understand what I'm saying? You're basically saying like,
so let me frame.
You're not morally. Yeah, you don't have a moral position. You got a position.
I'm not taking a moral side, but let me frame what both of you just said.
You got like a subjective position. Your position is subjective based on like the white person. We're going to give it to the white guy. You don't have an idea because if you
I
look at,
understand what you're saying.
if you look at it, like say you look at India, right, or Africa, they might have some value in how to do something. But according to you, you say no, there's no value in anything how any other country does something.
No,
but there's only value
putting
in
words
how
in my
we
mouth.
do it.
No, you're putting
And that's
words
why
in my
you say
mouth.
that's what everyone.
No. So let me explain those two bits over there. So, and just let me trace it back to your conversation. There's two ways to look at morality, right? So if you look at the end of the Western canon, and I look at Nietzsche, I can say ultimately, philosophically, I can argue that all morals must collect into relativism. If you're a person of faith, like myself, I inform my morals are informed by God. So you either have a top-down hierarchy that is
Will you
axiomatic.
give me your coat? Give me your coat.
Why? Are you cold? Absolutely.
Let's not do this.
Well, your coat.
I want your shirt now.
Give me a cigarette.
Welcome to the Brotherhood of Christ.
Hey, you knew it.
Of course
I wasn't expecting you to kill
I'm Christian, my friend. No, so if you look at this, the
undercut my
argument.
point I was about to make.
Yeah, but that's called Christian love, brother. And we are after all of the same faith in a sense. Your question about morals are either relativistic in the genealogy of morals, or they're given as people like you and I would believe of God. So the question, I'm not making a relativistic moral claim that one way of organizing society is superior to another. I'm making the claim that they're different.
Okay.
And Joseph was on the money. He's like, how do we then define equality when your axioms are inverted? How do I speak about universal suffrage, universal rights, and universal law if I don't start with the propositions we're equal? I start with the propositions we're not, because science tells me we're not. And as a scientist, I cannot reject empiricism.
So what
Science tells
aspect?
us we're different. It doesn't tell us
we're
we're
not
not
equal.
equal.
But
Equal is.
I didn't say equal. I said
involves a
different.
value judgment. It's
But I said-
ethical,
yeah.
political.
Correct.
It's not. It's not
Correct.
genetic.
No, but we're equal.
Equality
We're
isn't
equal
genetic.
to the
No,
law, right?
different.
Okay,
Equality
law, exactly.
Equality cannot be.
So, if people
defined.
unpack
Can I
our
say
DNA,
you're getting so much
they-
more
they
logic?
see
Can you
that,
see the problems? Your entire discourse
you've
is
got
on
brown,
the
darker
inverted
skin than me.
narrative.
But that's not a relevant factor in determining anything of value.
Yeah, for the legal system. Yeah, exactly.
For a legal system, it's just
not-
an irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It's
so I'm
just
saying
an
the legal
irrelevant
system is an objective thing. It doesn't care if you're black or white.
It's
Right?
irrelevant
Yeah.
under the law.
Yeah.
But I would argue that everything we see in our problems and trouble and strife today is based on
So
the
why
fact
is
that
it-
difference is not irrelevant.
Okay, so coming back
okay,
to
so
my
ju-
earlier point.
Difference
So
is
salient. So if we have a contract, if we have a contract that you're going to supply me with 3,000 coats every week,
or just this one,
or just that one, for a fixed price, and you decide actually
to
renege on the deal, what does the fact that we have some superficial differences between us affect the? How does that affect, in terms of coming back to an organisational structure for society?
Okay, I'll give you a very clear example in a neo-realistic scientific fashion, right?
Okay.
So do you know what time to wait is? Do you know what, time to wait or deferred gratification?
Yes.
Okay, so deferred gratification has a genetic component. How do we know that? We can take the H2B5LR gene, we can plot cultures and societies, and we draw the following shape. Scandinavian countries, followed by the Anglo-Saxon Germans, have the longest time to wait, the most individualism. Japan is right at the other end. It has the tightest in-group preference, followed by China and the African countries. If I now create an economic value, so let me give you a simple economic transaction test. If I create the marshmallow test, do you know what that is?
No.
If I give you one marshmallow, if I give you one coat right now to be warm, I give you those 30 coats.
Are you talking about the law of diminishing marginal returns?
No, not the law of diminishing returns. If I give you this one coat right now, which has immediate value proposition, I give you 30 coats in 20 minutes that you can sell on the market. Different genetic traits will cause different adoption of time to wait. So economic transactions, and that shows up in the German banking system.
Why do you think that's genetic? That's environmental.
That's what
It's historical.
No, again, back to the principle. Everything is a balance between genetic and environment. Nothing is either or. It's always a seesaw.
You're much smarter than I'm much more red than I am. What's it called where you, by your observation of the experiment itself, corrupts it? There's a term for it. When you dip the thermometer, interference. And actually, I'm going to change my point completely. My main issue with this, it's not a good argument. My main issue with this is there's absolutely no way of determining whether it's genetic or whether it's cultural. So you describe the society of Japan. So by looking at Japan, you're saying Japanese, Chinese, they're behaving a certain way. Africans closely following them. The other end, but these societies have cultures, and you're attributing those cultures to
as emergent properties of individuals acting in.
But are you saying it's determined from DNA?
But you're saying
using
part-
emergence? What does it
partially.
mean?
But there's no way.
So emergence
You've got to be clear.
No
You're
way of
often not
deduction.
clear.
Like
no
all
way
of
of
these
let me
distinguishing
explain emergence, right,
what
for
part
you.
is
So
genetically
the
related
history
and
of
what part
science
is
has been the history of what is called reductionism. So ever since you trace modern science to its roots, all the way down all the sciences, you have the most precise science we have today. That is called
genes
QCD,
differ according
which is
to
quantum
race?
chromodynamics.
But there are certain
It gives you the
there are
best
certain
precision measurement
genetic
in observational reality.
you know,
But we
for
had the
example,
biggest
things that
crisis in
control
science
the
for the last
eye
30
colour
years.
and, you know,
It's
certain
called the
areas
Okay,
of
yeah,
the
okay, but what? Yeah, but what
Given
about
I can
don't think-
reduce
but then-
intellectual
traits,
traits,
cultural
then
traits.
Exactly, but
I
then
can't
that's
put
just
Humpty Dumpty up
entirely
bottom again.
Yeah.
It's
So when I use the word
associating
emergence, I
the
use
group
it in
of
a
people have
scientific
this culture,
fashion.
Yeah.
Which says,
and therefore
how
saying
do
there
I-
must be some
yeah.
genetic.
How do I
there's no actual
describe
factual-
emergent
This
properties
is
and
precisely
behaviors
why.
of
What's his
system?
name? Is it Watson? The
That's
guy
what we
who's,
mean by emergence.
who was stripped
So
of
when I
his,
say social cultural
what was he,
behaviors
stripped of
emerge,
his OBE
I
or
say they
something
emerge as
today?
the interactions and actions of individuals, creating things like
for
politics,
repeating his
society,
claim that,
culture.
They
They emerge
emerge
bottom up from a genetic
All we're saying is
description.
it determined.
Hasn't all
This is in the
society
news today.
hasn't that been the same?
Watson
If you
or
take
something.
Islam, something I know. Islam's something I know a little bit about. And if you follow the emergence of Islam in different areas, what you'll see migrations of people through them. Empires create the ability for mass movement of people, and so. With empires, you create a change in the demography, a change of the ethnic groups within them. And so, one of the things I struggle with is you look at today, and you're saying that everything that's wrong with society can be traced back to the Enlightenment.
No, because everything done in society is the emergent challenge of not taking difference at its core on a scientific basis and then revisiting these explanations. Because these explanations have run into an intellectual brick wall. Let me give you a simple example to prove the point, right? So I spent a decade in investment banking, right? So in investment banking, we run the world's markets, right? So we can't predict the price.
We do.
You think you do.
Actually, no, your guys think we do.
And that's exactly why they all tried. And that very statement. But anyway, let's follow that. I think it's funny, man. So if you look at it, we have a predictor class of problems. I can tell. So at JP Morgan, we ran hedge funds that had statistical arbitrage trading by automatic programming, which hedge fund would trade. But I can't tell you the price of tin or the copper markets past a horizon. I have a failure of predictability bottom up because I have a failure to tackle emergence. When I come at a problem top down, like the weather or the tin.
I think you don't understand what you're talking about. Look, this question was simple,
Well, that's
right?
a wonderful
It was a
characterization,
Simple
which I'll
question,
take on
right?
heart.
Does culture, determined by DNA? And you say yes or no? Is it yes or no?
No.
It's yes or no, right? Like, to
You
what
are
extent?
framing a question with a binary response,
okay.
and the question is not well formed.
But is DNA a major?
If you ask a question, you need to pause and wait for the answer.
How do you assess what aspect of behaviour is genetically influenced and what is
Very
not?
easy. We have 55 years of twin studies. So scientifically, the only way you can conduct an experiment with genes is to take two identical twins and measure them in other environments. There's no other way in science. Twins separated have the same genes, and then we look at how those two genes operate, and that's
Okay,
how we
but then
create
how
our
do you
data.
distinguish? Because obviously some studies are flawed.
And what about other
In fact,
factors?
most of them.
The scientific method comes round and round again, but the point is what we have for increasing data is we see that everything is a seesaw. Some percentage genetic, some percentage environmental. Genes propagate, environments don't. So there's no genetic biological way to you copy and pass on your experience. You can do by stories and narratives and media, but your genes propagate, right? So we know everything is a genetic balance. Nothing is 100% either way, and we know emergent structures are now showing up. Despite the leftist control of academia, they can't suppress the narrative. So the Neo-Reactionary are not some sort of alt-right clowns playing with their pole and keyboards. They're not a bunch of Sieg Heilers. They are, at least the intellectual side of our movement says, our job is to question what is that optimal post-neoliberal, post-enlightenment organization of society. And we believe our answer is in a trinity of ethno-nationalism, theonomics, and libertarian capitalism.
So my response to that is coming what I was saying before. When we look at the most successful, when the greatest advancements for mankind occurred, they didn't occur in tiny
I lost my
ethnos.
wife.
That's not good. It was not the emergence of ethno-states. It was not the tiny little fiefdoms. It was mighty empires: the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the
Also
various
Armenian
caliphates.
Empire, right?
And so-
Ottoman Empire, which you guys know about.
But these weren't formed around ethno or
Ethno
genetic
states,
models.
yeah.
There was a huge spectrum of diversity within those empires.
Afterwards. But they emerged out of feudal tribal systems. And then when you, back to my original diagram, Joseph, physical collectivism versus abstract collectivism. I can't scale physical genetics. I can't have that many people close. So I start introducing universal.
Okay, look, I've got a simple question for you, right?
Yes,
like,
sir.
do you think that Britain should be majority white? Is that what you're saying? Like,
I
let's get
believe-
to the point. 'Cause this is what he's saying, right? He's basically saying
Yeah,
you
I
want
believe there should
Britain
be
to be majority
correct.
white.
I'm
No,
not
let's just get
majority.
to the
What
point,
I
right?
need to- there
Let's
should
not be
be-
so abstract that we're getting confused about.
Okay, so
Let's get to the
there
point.
should be a percentage for an ethno state, especially white ones that are under demographic replacement. I don't want 70% non-ethnic native people to be in Britain. I don't care if they're Vietnamese, Africa, I don't care what they are, because that changes the right of self-determination, the rights you care so much about.
Even if that
Would
results
you
in your
agree that right now,
deportation.
nine,
Well, the issue what you're saying, right?
Sacrifice my moral consistency.
So the issue,
90% of, but you'd agree that at the moment, around about 90% plus of the inhabitants of this country are white British.
87%.
87%.
But
So I mean, so that the
Can I just follow my point? You're non-white. Yeah. But you're also not. Are you an Indian background? Is that
Half Indian, half English.
But you're also not Indian. No. And where in this world, where every ethnicity creates their own ethno state,
but that's
where
not
do
100%
the people like you or I fit in?
you can choose which one. You can choose.
Ambassadors between.
Okay. So
he's got
position
he has
for yourself.
a special position there because he's like can go anywhere, but the rest of us got to stay in one place.
Well, I can anyway, but I separate my position from the moral position I take.
Yeah,
I
gotcha,
can't-
yeah.
I can't change the laws of God.
The issue what you're saying.
But would you give someone
to that point,
But would
so
you
you're
give
saying-
someone who's mixed race? So let's say that somebody is
Like myself?
Yeah, he's
I
mixed
like
race.
myself. My father's
I'm
Welsh.
also mixed.
My father's Welsh. My mother's Jewish.
Oh gosh.
Right?
And I thought you were proper Jewish.
So
The half Jake.
My wife is 100% German, though she wants to be exotic. She's looking for some other non-German bit. There's nothing in there. So we're going. So you're half Welsh and half.
so in your ideal situation, would I be able to choose which culture?
No, the culture would choose you.
Exactly, it's the ambassador. So I don't want to say I don't want black people, brown people here. I want the people to decide for themselves because you want self-determination, right? You want self-determination from Israel.
But to
you
use
want
your,
a pluralistic
to use your
Israeli
principle,
model,
I
right?
think you look at where something went wrong, and I think it's the right way to do things. And you look at the worst. One of the worst horrors I know, obviously I'm going to say this as a Jew, but one of the worst horrors I know
Chelsea's lost
is
it. No. Sorry, it's of course
it's the
event.
Holocaust.
Yes.
And your thinking led to the Holocaust.
No.
Yes.
No,
But
it was
certainly-
an
certainly wasn't
asshole
egal-
who couldn't think straight.
No. But you
And a
trace
weak
everything down
population.
to egalitarian values, everything down to genetics. But then when it comes to the Holocaust, that was one person who didn't apply it correctly. And my fear
And
with
use
what-
bad in group preference.
my fear with what you're proposing is it creates a situation where, whether you like it or not, every society on the planet is diverse. There is diversity amongst, there are very few nations, except South Korea, which are almost 100%.
North Korea.
North Korea.
North Korea.
Few Chinese there now at the moment, though. But there's in most nations, there's a lot of diversity. And what happens to those minority populations? And if we look at history, the worst, whether it's in Rwanda, whether it's in Germany, and so that's what
That's
scares me
also
the
a
most about
legitimate
what you're
concern for me too. And I believe without addressing the fundamentals underpinning that we are heading for a slaughter of
I
the
think the
lambs.
issue, I think the real issue where it comes down to, right, is you're basically making a statement, okay, that's saying that we want non-whites out of this country, right?
I didn't say
He's
that.
not saying that.
No,
he's
but
just
that's
like himself is
No,
non-white.
that's basically what you're saying, right?
No, but I'm not saying
That is
that.
what you're saying, right? That's
No, but
what-
he's saying
that's
you're
what
telling me what I'm
He's
saying.
saying the white indigenous Britons
So what would
have
it
the
look-
right to
self-determine.
determine what the
So that means that means I can't determine my position in society, right? That's what you're saying.
But not as an aggregate as opposed to an individual.
Yeah. So basically, this is basically a power.
So where are you from originally?
What you're saying is
Where are
that
you from originally?
I'm from India, yeah.
No, but where in India?
Gujarat.
Okay, so if I, for example, brought in a lot of Vietnamese people and I overrun Ahmedabad and I overrun Gujarat and I get rid from the sugar in Gujarati cooking, do you think the Gujaratis would be pissed? Do you think the rights of the Gujarati people to say, no, I like that extra chini mera khana mein? Do you think that's a legitimate self-determination of the Gujarati people in Gujarat?
I don't.
It's a
really,
simple question.
I don't really care what the.
Okay, so you're
what
deracinated and decultured. You're a universalist. Right?
I don't care what you're saying, right? It sounds like what you're saying is like You're trying to make an argument, but your position basically is we want to unite white people against non-whites, right?
No, you're putting
That's
words into
basically
my
what
mouth.
you're saying.
No.
What I'm saying to you, okay, is that that's not going to happen, okay?
But that's another statement.
White British working class people are not going to be able to overpower non-whites in this country. It's not going to happen.
How many percent non-white?
It's not going to happen.
How many percent non-white?
It's never going to happen.
But, okay, you keep saying that. How
Your
many
position is
percentage-
weak. You guys are going to lose the war. You're going to lose worse than you're losing now. You're just
But you
going to
see
lose.
what you're doing right now is beautiful.
You're losing already.
What you're doing right now is beautiful.
The establishment
You're
is
expressing
dominating-
your biological determinacy in group preference.
exactly right.
No,
Look-
it's coming out emotionally, and it's a good thing.
But
you're
what
returning
you're
to
saying-
the state of nature.
Look, basically,
I mean,
your
you're
position,
making
right?
my case
Your
for me.
position is that the white British people are superior to the non-whites. It's not
no,
true.
where have I
It's
ever
not
said
true. That's
that?
what he's saying. That's what he's saying.
Well,
He-
I
he-
can't say I
agree with him.
but that's what he's saying.
at all, but I'm not advocating for white supremacy whatsoever.
He didn't say
I'm
that.
not saying
That's
that.
the way I see what you're saying.
But
right?
let me help
no,
you
no,
understand my
it's not.
position better. I'm not
It's
saying
not.
that.
Okay,
Let's
what
take
he's
whites out of it.
Yeah,
let
go
me go to Korea, and let's say we make peace in North and South Korea. Hail Trump! And suddenly South Koreans go like, "Hey, I want to get a lot of people from Philippines to move into North Korea." I would stand on the side of the North Koreans for self-determination against the Vietnamese. Notice no white people involved here. Nothing to do with white supremacy. I would stand on the side of the North Koreans to say, hey, maybe only 20% of non-North Koreans can come in here, because when we want to preserve our North Korean expression of our culture in our particular variants of our kimchi.
But what I'm saying
What
to
is
you-
that? What is wrong with that
No,
position
his
of
assumption.
self-determination?
His assumption is this, right? He's saying that all the good things in England, okay, come from white DNA.
I didn't
That's what he's
say
saying.
that.
That is what he's saying. No, that is what he's
I
saying.
want to defend
But
native
why do you want to
rights in
preserve?
England.
Why do you want to preserve white DNA then?
Because why wouldn't you want to
Forget why.
protect white
Exactly.
people?
So it's a competition between me and
Forget
you, right?
why.
You're saying you want to preserve white DNA.
Outcomes
And
in
I'm
your
saying,
preference.
and I'm saying to do that.
Welcome aboard.
To do that, you got to kick me out, right? So you can try to do that.
So your argument here is self-preservation instinct of your own individual case is your moral argument against the situation on the board. Is that your
Basically, I'm saying, right, you can either be a racist, okay, or be a non-racist.
Racism is a
if you want to be a
left-wing
racist,
term made up in
if you want to be a
1930s by
racist, that's fine.
Trotsky. I mean, I don't look at racism.
But listen, you're gonna lose terribly, okay, if you're a racist. Hitler lost, okay, and you're gonna lose, okay. You think you got some arguments here? You don't
I
have
think
any
that's a
arguments.
bad argument, because
The
some
word
of the
like
most
Hitler,
racist societies
racist
also
fascism.
did very good. Like caliphates, varies.
Baya.
Caliphs are not racist
Baya,
because they're
baya,
universal
baya.
Islamists, right?
Baya, baya.
You could be
The
a
most
Muslim,
racist country
right?
in
And
the
caliphate.
world, in every Pew Research study, without absolute, even a close exception, is India. India is the strongest ethno state with the most in-group preference, the least likeness to marry out of their race. So for an Indian to tell someone else not to be racist, it really goes against the data.
I'm not saying don't be racist. I'm saying you can be racist, okay?
But who's
you,
racist,
But
yeah?
you gotta understand, okay? If you're gonna be racist, okay?
But who's racist?
You better make sure that you win. You better make sure that you win the war, because I don't think here that your people that support you, okay, the James Goddard, the people that support you, the
I don't think James Goddard's got anything to do.
These people, listen.
I don't have any
Look, all I'm
association
saying
with
to
the
you
clowns
is that
on the
these
street.
people are not going to win. And now, as a white British person, okay, you got to understand, okay, you want to leave the EU, that's
So
fine.
let me ask you a simple question, just on that. I hear your point.
Listen,
Spoken
other
a lot.
places, other
No, no,
cultures
you've going a lot.
got value
Listen to
as
other
well.
people, listen to
Yeah,
other people. Let me ask you a simple question just to show us how. When was the last time a white nation army lost against a non-white force?
We're not talking about nations.
No, that's
we're
a
talking
simple
about,
question.
We're talking about tribes.
Yeah,
we're talking about
but
nations.
I didn't say
this
nation.
okay,
No, you
is
asked
not
my
a white
question.
ethno
No,
nation.
no.
We're talking
Not
about a group
yet.
of white people who are tribes.
Not
Yeah,
yet.
not yet. So exactly, that's what we're getting to right now. We're getting to it, exactly.
So that's what I understand. So your fear is that white guys are going to collectivize and they're going to kick you out.
It's not my fear. That should be your fear. Because if it
No
happens,
fear whatsoever.
you're going to get kicked out, mate. Because you're going to lose the war.
Anything that comes closer to Christ keeps me just fine. I mean, I have no fears of anything.
Christ
at all.
wasn't a racist like you, so let's just be.
No, he was a good Jewish man.
I think let's try and not to resort to ad hominems.
I
think
think stuff is quite dull.
one of the things that I'm not as sharp as a lot of the people here, but one of the things I'm struggling to understand. No, it's not genuinely. Haven't been to university, haven't been to sixth form, like barely got GCSEs. Working class lad from the north, working class lad from a northeast village. One of the things I struggle with is. You are making every point of the conversation. You're making a value judgment on what is superior and what is inferior for society. For society,
One based on your realism.
but okay, but
The only value judgment I'm saying is one not based in neo-realism is unscientific
Okay, so-
and unfounded.
So realism for me,
Yeah, I mean
is
scientific realism.
and scientific realism. If you look back at the actual where society spiked, where there were the most technological advancements, where you had the greater or the most powerful
Enlightenment.
societies coming out of, they were diverse. Like the greatest empires were the empires that could accommodate the diversity. So whether it was the Babylonians coming in, and so as an example, the Babylonians allowed the Jews to return to Israel. They said they could rebuild.
This man mentioned Spinnaker, your other friend mentioned Spinnaker, and you could argue that the Reformation would never have happened without Eastern doubt. I get that, but these are universalist organizing principles.
So what in your
Perfect world model.
in your utopian vision, if you can call it that.
I hate utopias.
Okay, fine. But in your ideal society, to put it another way, what would be the role of
soaps or anything normal?
non-ethnic Britons within within the body politic?
There would be.
What right? Would they have democratic rights? Would they have the same?
They would have different sets of rights. So for example,
civic
let's
rights,
look at
but not
Japan. Look
political
at
rights.
Japan. Yeah, civic rights, political. In Japan, you can go there, live there, work there, bring up your family, but you're not going to be allowed to alter the Japanese politics of Japanese people. If you care about that and you want to live in Japan, I have a friend, she's American, she spent 25 years getting her German papers and citizenship. She will not be a vote and her children will have no birthright citizenship. She loves the Japanese culture and she wants to be part of Japan. The Japanese love her back, but she's not going to overrun their self-determination. Self-determination being an organizing principle.
Is there an argument that your position could lead to more ethnic tribal conflicts?
There's a
in the
risk,
sense that
yeah,
with Japanese, they had an empire, they expanded. Wherever you tend to have that homogeny of an ethnic, particularly as they develop
You're
wealth
on the
and
money.
strength.
This only works if you don't allow a expansionist empire. So if
How do you
did
prevent
that? Well, international strength. Right? So you must have international relations. So I believe in a multilateral view of the world. So I expect multilateral.
So basically, you let the Jews run everything at the top.
So you are a utopianist.
after us.
You are a utopianist then. You are a utopianist as the
And that's
communist.
exactly it on the camera, and that's exactly what the alt-right have a concern for, my friend. God bless you.
You do believe in a utopia, and it's as fanciful as the
pragmatic
communists in the sense that they have a world. The reality is, communism fails, in my opinion, because of greed and self-serving interests, and just it's a control from the top down.
And the inability to do a plan to control the economy and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
But what you're saying is fully dependent on the collectivism of the world, of tribes, of ethnicities, getting along. No, but if you look at history, which is what you base your entire, shows the exact opposite to what you're saying. They don't get along.
Yeah.
They take the sword to each other and they battle and they fight for land and power.
Between you and me, because I don't want to lose, if nothing, my marriage and my life. But when the lights go down in Speaker's Corner, that true tribalism shows up just in multi-ethnic, multicultural societies. You know that, I know that. They come out at night. When I mean they come out at night, those feelings come out at night, right? And those feelings cannot be ignored without running the risk of WW3. Why? Because Whitey is collectivizing. And I know this because I know them.
You started it.
It all started 2,000 years ago.
In the Bay.
When you chaps took our Lord. And but anyway.
Your Lord, he's our mate. He's Jesus from the block.
It's been a pleasure, sir.
And your name? Nice to meet you. Sorry for taking so much of his time.
Ralph. Nice to meet you, boys. So at least we have some. I'm sure you're going to trigger the entire 1488 crew.
I mean,
Here we go.
you're going to be out of the community now. You're talking. You just shook the hands with 3 Jews. You were the token brown white.
I want a strong Zionist ethno-nuclear state in Israel. I don't believe in your equal rights for Palestinians. Nothing nonsense.
Can I throw something into the pot? We were just talking kind of off camera here, is demographics. We were talking, this gentleman here was saying about how if push came to shove and there was a war or whatever, that, the ethno-nationalists would be wiped away. But the white people of this country are in decline population-wise. If that doesn't reverse.
So you better be going off and stop talking to me and go and have some, go and make some babies.
I've got 5 daughters. I've done my bit. Yeah. I just follow God's will. There's nothing else to it. But most white middle-class Westerners, they don't even want any children. And this is why there's a suicide going on in the West. And the reason I can't see how they can reverse it, because the reproductive power and decisions are given to women. So the men cannot reverse it, and I can't see the women voluntarily embracing large family.
Just to add to your point, even many Asians are having like below
Replacement.
So yeah, like
But not Muslims. No.
But we're not Muslim.
Give it back. She's a lovely lady, but she's
Listen, if he wants to take it, let him take it.
If you're choosing Jesus, I've got no interest in
This
talking to
is
Christians.
the Bible, Daniel. This is the book of
She's a
Daniel.
lovely lady.
I know, he's a lovely, lovely Mashiach we've got. There is no other way.
A lovely false Mashiach you've got.
What Mashiach are you waiting for?
The real
An
one.
Antichrist, one who wins all the power in the yeah. If you don't get the right one, he came at the exact time. All the rabbis were waiting for.
Hopefully he's just scored against Manchester United.
My dear lady.
If you don't get the real one, you're going to be
Are you Jewish?
Jewish. I was born Jewish.
You were born to a
yes,
Jewish
yes.
mum, to a Jewish mum.
Yes.
Yes.
There's some
Perfect.
converting in my life.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
My family too. So the only truth you have in terms of what the
Is
Old
the
Testament
absolute truth.
is what the Old Testament says comes from our
Absolute.
families, yeah, because our families preserved the Hebrew language, they
They
translated
did.
it,
They
and so
did.
without it you have now all of the
He was
rabbis.
to be despised and hated.
all
All
of
these
the
things.
all of the
wounded
rabbis.
for our transgression.
2,000 years. 2,000 years ago.
All of the rabbis.
All of the rabbis.
Almost universally.
Do you know what Einstein said? He's never been so enthralled by what this Mashiach.
Really?
Incredible things he said.
Was he a Christian?
Was he a Christian?
Einstein? I don't think so.
he wasn't. So he wasn't
You know
that
what
enthralled.
Disraeli said? He said, never has there been a prince of Israel that has been, I forget the exact, it's been so wonderful as the prince who died on Calvary.
Yet he didn't believe he was the son of God.
He's God. He's the Son of God. He's
But
the Son
Einstein
of Man.
didn't-
He's everything.
Einstein didn't believe
Wonderful
that.
Counselor, Mighty
But
God, Everlasting
Einstein-
Father, Prince of
Einstein
Peace.
isn't the best.
Everlasting Father.
Yeah, you can't
Einstein's
quote
the
Einstein.
Son of God.
Listen, you can't quote Einstein. When
I can
Einstein
quote them all.
didn't-
Pincus
but-
Lapide.
no,
There are
listen to
so
me.
many
Listen,
that loved
trouble
him.
with people like you is you talk and you don't listen. If you listen,
I do
you
listen.
quoted Einstein.
Einstein was not a Christian.
Einstein.
Can't take over everything from your
God, man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to
They might feel
ITV.
like blacks are a bit more violent.
I'm glad you said that
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I was
yeah.
trying to get that way. And the reason why I say psychology is because historically, was it Africans that mistreated Indians, as in dominated the Celtic country, or was it Europeans? Which one did it?
I was just about to say that.
But they're not living in Europe, though, they're living in the UK.
No, hold on. In India, Indians are aware of people coming to their land, right? Now, did Africans go to India and subjugate Indians, or did Europeans do it?
Europeans,
Thank you. So today, your parents who are old